From every level. I coached at the high school level, all the way up to the professional level. My wife, who took position 6 at the Sydney Marathon today, she's working a full-time job and she ran 246. With her personal best is 229 for the marathon. For 10,000 meters, she was position 12 at the 2012 Olympic Games in London, with 31:12 for 10K. So when she was running at her top level, she was coached by someone called Jack Daniels, not the guy who makes the drink. But is anyone familiar with Jack Daniels as a coach?
On Nike, okay. I think.
Yeah, he has a book called Daniels Running Formula. He was actually named by Runner's World magazine as the best coach in the world. So she was coached by him, but he was coaching her from a distance. So he would send the training, and then I was the guy there every day saying, okay, today the training says you're to do this, and I had to hold the stopwatch, I had to give the splits, and I had to communicate with Jack. And by doing that, I learned his system. And it's actually a system. It's a formula that's based, it's where they've taken running and they've reverse engineered it actually. They've constructed mathematical tables that explain that if you're running a marathon in X amount of time, then when you're training for speed work, you should be running at pace Y. When you're training tempo, you have to be running, and it's very specific, it's numeric, it's very quantitative. And so there's not a lot of question marks about it. It even has formulas that you say, okay, but I live in Mumbai and I'm going to Delhi where the weather is different. How should I adjust my training? You can know it very objectively. So it takes a lot of the mystery out of that. And before Janet started working with Jack, we were actually using his book to coach her. And I was, okay, you can't coach your wife. It's not. Yeah. You will either end up at the divorce court or the funeral home. So I can't say that I was coaching her, but I was colliding with her using his book to develop the training. And she ran well. Prior to working with Jack, she had run 32:38 for 10K, 1:10:59 for half marathon, and 2:37 for full marathon. Within 14 months, and that was us taking the formula and doing what we thought we knew was best using the formula, and those are good results. But within 14 months of starting to work with Jack's training, she had won 6 U.S. national championships. She had run 2:29 for the marathon, taking position 5 at the U.S. Olympic trials. She had broken the U.S. national record for 25K. And she had lowered her 10K PR to 31:12. So, yeah, there were small adjustments, but it's, you're now getting the word from the real guru and not taking his book and trying to do what you can do with it. But through that relationship, I also learned a better understanding of the formula. And myself, my background is actually, I'm a registered nurse. I work in healthcare. I'm actually currently completing my doctorate in nursing. And so I understand how the human body works. I understand healthcare. And then taking that knowledge and combining it with the conversations and the communication with Jack, I also learned a lot more about coaching. I coached for 20 years from the high school level on. But working with him, I did that. And at some point, I was approached by these guys who were actually directly working with Jack and was told we have a project called Run Smart, where we want to provide coaching directly to clients, either in group settings or even one-on-one private consulting. And we would like you to join our coaching roster. So I took up that invitation and I started coaching with Run Smart. Until now I have clients that I work with all over the world, here in India, in Macau, in Peru, in the UK. And we use the formula as the basis for our training. Now we don't say that everyone has to follow the formula the same way because everyone is different. Somebody who has a lot of natural speed and can run 100 meters really well but wants to train for the marathon needs to do it slightly differently than someone who can run all day long but has no natural speed. So the formula is a starting point. It's not a finishing point. But you have to let it set the boundaries for what you use. And so that's how I approach the coaching, is to let the formula dictate the starting point and then make small adjustments from there. And so yeah, that's kind of my approach. It seems to work well. It's funny because of the athletes I coach, the one with whom I've deviated the least from the actual formula is the guy who ran 2:12 in the marathon. We use it almost as if we just take it directly from the book with him. And before I started coaching him, I had run 2:22, which is quite good. But within 1 year, he had reduced to 2:12. So I can say the formula really works. Yeah, in fact, last week the guy ran in the U.S. Championships for 20 kilometers, and he was position 3. The guys who defeated him, one of them has run 59 minutes for half marathon, and the other one has run 61:00 for half marathon. And he was following them just by a few seconds. So although the conditions were really tough, we can't really interpret the time too directly. I think when you see where he was in relation to those guys, you can say, okay, he's made some progress. So, yeah, I think it's important for running to be based in science, because it is a science. Running is applied physiology. Just like healthcare is applied physiology, just like nutrition is applied physiology. It's not like cricket. Cricket, there's an element of physiology. How strong is the guy? How much does the bat weigh? How fast is the ball moving? But at the end of the day, there's a skill. If you have a guy who's incredibly strong and incredibly fast and has terrible eyesight, he's not going to do well in cricket. But running, it's just physiology until you get to the last 400 meters of the race, and then it's tactics. So when we talk about running, we have to talk about it as a science. And that means we have to approach it scientifically. And that means we can use the scientific method. We can formulate a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, evaluate the results, and then draw our conclusion. And that's what Jack did. He took a mathematical model and he applied it to running, and he drew a conclusion that led to him actually getting his PhD as an exercise physiologist. So we know that this thing has been vetted scientifically. The publications are peer-reviewed. It's legitimate science. And so it's a great place to start with running, because running at its core, it's purely quantitative, right? Because we don't go to the end of the run and say, okay, let's ask a qualitative question. How do you think you did? What does everyone do when they finish running? They go directly to the what? So we can say it's quantitative. And so because it's quantitative, we know we can reduce it to something scientific, and it's important to do that. But not just on race day. We don't just look at our race day quantitatively, we also have to look at our training. How much did I train? How fast did I go? Was it too much? Was it too little? So that it all fits into a big overall plan, maybe for preparing for the race, maybe for the season, maybe for the year, maybe for the lifetime, but to let it be rational, to let it be logical, so that we know that we're listening to actual data and not just how we feel, what is an opinion, what is everybody doing, what does Facebook say, what does Runner's World say, but to take something that's constant and kind of stick with it and follow it. And I won't say there's one right way to do it, but I know the one wrong way to do it is to go from this way to this way to this way to this way, find something and stick with it long enough for it to make a difference, because otherwise you never really know what worked. Another thing I would suggest in training is manipulate only one variable at a time. Don't add volume to your training while also increasing the speed. Don't increase the speed while also reducing the frequency, decreasing the frequency between your quality sessions. Change one variable at a time. We talk about intensity. How fast are you running? Volume. How much are you running? And density. How frequently are you running hard efforts or long efforts? Those are kind of the three variables that we can manipulate in training. The unspoken variables are work. How much sleep are you getting at work? You might not have control over that. The weather, the conditions. Are you running uphill? Are you running downhill? Are you running in high altitude, low altitude? On what type of surface? All of those things are things we can't control, but if we apply the scientific formula, we can interpret them to understand that if I'm running at altitude, I need to slow my pace by X amount per kilometer. If the temperature exceeds a certain level, I should adjust my pace by X, Y, or Z. If I'm overweight by a certain amount, it's going to affect me in what way compared to when I used to be a previous weight. So all of these things are things we have to consider and be rational about it. Don't get frustrated and say, okay, I'm running today in 2,000 meters altitude. It makes me feel terrible, therefore I am terrible. It's just a fact. There's less oxygen available there. And we know that oxygen is going to be the primary limiting factor in how we perform. Now, somebody asked me today about hydration. Yeah, hydration is a factor, but not so much of a factor. Normally, when you finish the run, or if you're going in a run and your body tells you it's time to slow down, do you generally slow down because you're thirsty? No, you generally slow down because your heart and your lungs or your legs are giving you some kind of message, and that message is driven by your body's ability to consume oxygen. And this is the formula that Jack calculated, is if we consider oxygen to be the limiting factor in our ability to run at a certain speed, then we can use that as the basis for our calculations, and we can build a formula that uses oxygen consumption as the basis for that. So when I talk about it, we'll talk about V.O2, which is velocity over oxygen consumption. How fast can you go at X percentage of your oxygen oxygen utilization? So if we think of it that way, and we use oxygen as our governing factor, that's kind of the way I like to approach it. Oxygen is what drives running, and so let's let it drive how we think about running. So, yeah, I don't know. It's better for me to listen to what you guys want to know than to tell you what I want you to know.
There is lot of said about heart rate.
Heart rate, sure.
And there are lot many thumb rules for that heart rate calculation based on what you are doing and how you are running on that. So, what to follow rather first, and whether is it logical to go in that direction?
Sure. So the reason that heart rate is provided as the variable is because it's extremely difficult to get an objective measurement of your oxygen utilization when you're running. I mean, we can take oxygen blood gas, but that means we'll stop you from running. We'll put a needle in your artery. We'll, see how you're. Nobody wants to do that. So heart rate is a nice, easy variable to monitor in terms of biofeedback for measuring effort, percentage of capacity, and it's probably the best one to use. But it's different for everybody, because if you run a specific pace and get your heart rate to 180 beats a minute, it's going to be different from what I use, and it's going to be different based on the conditions. But I do think heart rate, it's a good starting point. I like using speed as the starting point in a historical performance. If you say my best time for 5K is 24 minutes, then I know, let's use 24 minutes as our starting point, and let's calculate everything off that, and then let's see how that lines up. And do we realize, okay, 24 minutes was underperforming? How does it work? Heart rate is good. I just think it's too variable from person to person. And at the end of the day, the watch doesn't care what your heart rate is. The clock at the end of the race doesn't ask you, what was your heart rate? It's a clock. And so I think you have to use it kind of as a secondary variable and not necessarily as your primary. But it is good. If your heart rate is too high on what's meant to be an easy run, you need to slow down, because your body is not getting the benefit that it's meant to get from an easy run. It's somewhere else putting out too much effort.
And other than that, you should say that heart rate can be used in training and not in the race.
On the race day, if the training has gone well and if the conditions are good, I don't think you necessarily have to use heart rate, because you now know, okay, I should be running pace X based on my training, and pace is pace.
What do you think I get somebody who's starting running in terms of how soon you should go into half, 10K to half, and then half to full?
Oh, I get this question all the time. And I think we have to look at, why do we run? What is the reason that you're running? Because different people have different motivations, and the motivation is going to dictate why you're doing it. Some people get into running for one reason and one reason only, because they need to go to work and they need to tell their colleagues they ran a marathon.
True.
For other people, they're getting into running because they want to achieve a level of fitness. They want their body to be in a certain state that allows life to be more enjoyable. In my perspective, for most people, training for the marathon is not conducive to feeling good. When you run a marathon, most of the time when you finish, you don't immediately think, man, when am I going to do another marathon? You immediately think, I'm not sure I want to keep doing this. However, when you run a half marathon, at least in my experience, when I finish a half marathon, I'm already thinking, okay, I could have done this better, this better, this better. Let me go and check the calendar and see when I can do another one. I feel like the half marathon is a fantastic distance for fitness. I feel like a 5K, to me, it's just too painful. If you're really trying to run a 5K well, you're running hard from start to finish. You don't even want to speak to anybody during the 5K. And at the finish line of a 5K, if people are running it well from start to finish, there's a lot of vomiting. A half marathon, the only reason you see someone vomit is if they decide in the last 1 kilometer, okay, I was not going hard enough, let me go suicide to the finish. But I like the half marathon as a benchmark, as something that if you're training for a half marathon, you're getting a fitness that's beneficial in life. It's probably making you feel better. It's getting your body to a healthy weight. The full marathon, unless you really gradually work your way up to it, the aches and pains that come with the full marathon are sometimes not conducive to smiling. And I think it's an important part of running, unless you're being paid money for it. You know, the guys that I coach who are professional athletes, they need to do the marathon because that's where you make money. For the rest of us, we need to do running in a way that optimizes our health. I am a coach, but first and foremost, I'm a healthcare professional. And I want to see people in my clinic who feel better because they're running, not worse because they're running. And I think for a lot of people, if it's only I need to complete a marathon, they'll be seeking medical care because of the running. And that's not necessarily a good scenario. So that, I don't know if that's a good answer.
One of the problems what we see in the emerging running circuit is that one of the problems which we face, most of us, every weekend people race.
Sure.
Every Sunday there is a race. What's your take on that?
I think you have to figure out how to utilize, you know, if you're training for a specific race down the road, then you utilize the weekly races as part of the training. And you just have to know that today's run is meant to be 21 kilometers, but for me it's going to be 5 kilometers at an easy pace, followed by alternating 1 kilometer, you know, something like that. That there's a tactic, that you're using it as a specific workout. And it's something I like to do with the runners I coach for some reasons. You know, practicing running on your own is very different from practicing running in a race scenario. And if you have a situation where on every weekend you can go and do a long run and have somebody providing you water, now you should take advantage of that. Yeah, why not utilize it? Yeah. So you have to learn to treat it as a workout, but also to exploit it. Take advantage of the fact that there will be people to run with. You might coordinate with some guys that, hey, here's the workout we're going to do. And then, utilize facilities like the water and stuff to your advantage. So it's not a race every weekend. Sometimes it's a race, sometimes it's a workout that looks like a race.
That's the underline. It's not a race every weekend. Question.
How important the posture is during the run? Posture and running.
Posture.
Somebody say you should run exactly this way.
Sure. So when you go home, if you have YouTube, go and look up a runner called Saif Saeed Shaheen, or Stephen Cherono. He was a steeplechaser from Kenya. He had the world record in the steeplechase. If you look at his form, it's terrible, according to coaches. The guy runs really weird, and he broke the world record. So if you go back into the 1990s, Michael Johnson, who was running 200 and 400 meters, he ran really weird. He looked wrong, but it obviously worked. He set the world record. So there's not one right way to do it. Relaxation, I think, is important. Proper application of physics is important. If somebody's body is moving this way, that's lateral movement. Running is about horizontal movement. The same with bouncing. If you put somebody on a treadmill and you put a camera to the side and you affix like a white sticker on their hip that can allow you to track oscillation, you know, the amplitude of their running stride, then if they run 10 kilometers on the treadmill, but you map out the route that dot traveled, maybe the dot went 11.5 kilometers. So there was a lot of wasted movement. So you want to minimize, yes, there has to be some vertical movement because we have to come off the ground in order to move forward. But you don't want to bounce up and down like this. So relaxation. If you lean too far forward, the reality is our glutes. Our butt is one of the biggest muscle groups in the body. But if you lean forward and then you try to activate the glute muscles, you can't do it. So if your hips are tight, then you're losing one of your major muscle groups, and you're forcing the other muscle groups to compensate, your hamstrings, your calves, and you're going to get an injury. And for most of us, the way we make money in this world involves sitting. If you're in an office, whatever, you sit for a significant amount of time in the hips. That's not a good position. That's not the way the human body is designed to spend most of its time. So you have to consciously make an effort to overcome that with yoga. Running is generally not going to fix your flexibility problems. You have to use a supplemental activity, some drills, some yoga, something like that. So I don't think there's one right posture, but there are things to avoid. Lateral movement, bouncing, overstriding where you're just putting too much force but not enough frequency and it becomes very inefficient. And it's different for everybody. There's a guy from Kenya right now called Badan Karoki, and he's run 58, I believe, high 58 minutes for the half marathon. And his stride rate, his cadence, his turnover is around 205 steps per minute. most elite runners are around 180. But I won't go and tell this guy, listen, you should change to 180 because, you know, he's run 58 for the half marathon. So obviously 205 works for him, but it doesn't work for most people. So there are outliers, there are unique individuals. But for the most part, relaxation, good hip posture, making sure that you're not hunching over, different things like that. So yeah, relatively vertical, keeping the shoulders relaxed, keeping the arms low, not somewhere up here, because you need your chest to be relaxed and open because that's your oxygen reservoir. And if you do something like this, you're reducing the capacity of your oxygen reservoir. You don't have as much of the good stuff that you need to run. So, does that answer your question? Sure, yeah, so when I used to coach high school, and I hope I'll pronounce it nicely, but we used the Surya Namaskar progression of yoga to begin all of our exercises, all of our training sessions. Because for one, after the first 1 week of teaching it to the athletes, then it bought me extra time to get to practice because they know when the clock says 3:30, we begin that progression, and we don't need coach here to tell us how to do that. But if you're familiar with that one, it's really nice for activating virtually all the muscle groups you need for running and also promoting a degree of relaxation before you run. So we used to do that before and after training every day, and it was nice because I taught it the first year. The second year, when the new athletes came to join the team, the old athletes, the returning guys, taught it to them. So I taught it one time, and that one session then took me for 4 years of knowing exactly what we do every day. So something like that, so that you do it before running, because just bending over, touching your toes, picking up your knees a little bit, that's not activating all the muscle groups. It's not getting you relaxed. So I actually do like something like a small yoga routine before the run as a good way to start.
Do you think we could see a sub-2 marathon in normal conditions during this next few years?
I don't think in the next few years, because I don't see any athlete on the horizon who I say, okay, that's the guy who can do it. I think even as we were leading up to, if you guys, anyone followed the Breaking 2, in the progression leading up to that, I don't think there was anyone wondering who was going to be the top guy in that. You know, from the years prior, we knew Kipchoge is the guy. And I was fortunate, I was teaching school in Kenya in the early 2000s, and I got to see Kipchoge run as a high school student. And even then, you didn't wonder, is this guy going to be something special? As a young boy, you saw Kipchoge run, and he was clearly above a level of the other guys, even the other Kenyans in the race. So it's going to take the right conditions, but also the right person. And I don't see anybody right now that I think, you know, probably the guy who could run sub-2 is a footballer somewhere because he's going that direction at the moment. I don't see the athlete who's ready to do it necessarily. But, you know, technology keeps improving. I think, my opinion, as somebody who lived in Kenya for an extended period of time and who watched the sub-2 closely, I think they made a mistake with the temperature. I think it was too warm. In Monza, I think ideally for a sub-2 effort, they need a temperature around maybe 3 or 4 degrees, because that's actually the temperature in the morning in Kenya when these guys are training. If you go back and watch that, the last 10 kilometers, you see a lot of sweat accumulating on Kipchoge. And if sweat is accumulating, it's not evaporating, and evaporation is the cooling mechanism of the body. So I think they made a mistake on the temperature. I think it needed to be a bit cooler.
Any questions?
Yes?
How important or necessary is weight training for running?
Weight training for running. I think weight training is essential, and I think when we speak even of the Kenyans, that's something that the top guys in Kenya are doing weight training now. They used to not do that. I don't think you're not trying to go and see, can I increase my squat lifting to a maximum level to help my running? But weight training, I think it's critical, and it doesn't have to be using weights. I shouldn't use the word weight training. Strength training is important for running. It could be body weight training, Pilates, something like that. But you do need an element of strength in order to sustain you through the running. Unless maybe if you had free time to run all day, every day, you can cultivate that strength for running. Otherwise, you need to do it in a more deliberate and direct way. And I think it needs to be functional. And as I said, for me, running is about improving the overall quality of life. And if you're a runner who cannot do any push-ups, then probably you're missing something in your quality of life, because you do need to be strong enough to move so far. Hold on to do so. Yeah.
All these gizmos, gadgets, there's a lot of data.
Sure.
It makes sense to know.
So, I think it does when it makes sense. I think that's the best way I could put it. If the numbers support what we're seeing in training, then I think I like to utilize it. Some of these gadgets, the reliability is it's good. It's not great. There'll be times when you see someone's heart rate, and if you correlate it to pace, you say, okay, that doesn't make sense. That's obviously some kind of glitch in the system. Other than that, I really do like it. For me, I coach most of the athletes I coach are not face-to-face situations. And so the platform I use for coaching is integrated with Garmin. So when somebody goes for a run, whether it's in India or in wherever it is on the planet, and they go home and their watch uploads the data, I see it the moment I log into the platform. So that's good for me. I think some of the other things like cadence, the ability to have it give you your cadence at the end of the run and realize that, okay, when my pace is slowing at the end of the run, I also see that my cadence was doing, because you'll see two things. Some people actually speed up the cadence as they become tired because the steps go smaller. Other people, they slow and the cadence slows. So it's nice to see those kind of bits of information. And if I was coaching someone directly at the track, I could go and watch it for myself. But for me as a coach, to be able to collect that data remotely and see it is useful. And I think other things that maybe don't necessarily occur, the question at the individual level, the data sets that we're accumulating now can start to show us really meaningful things, because we can take a sampling and see of 100,000 people. If we look at what they ran when the temperature was 5 degrees, and we look at what they ran when the temperature was 12 degrees, how much did that affect their pace? And we're no longer asking a person, we're asking a set of data that question. And that's a much more reliable way to draw that conclusion. With the number of people using the Garmin's now, you can have a data set that's huge and is valid really easily. And so I think they're good for that. I don't think they need to be a fixation. If you feel good and your watch tells you you should feel bad, listen to the watch. As a clinician, I also think it's funny. I wanted to take a set of vital signs on a patient one day, and she said, "No, just check my watch." I had to tell her, "No, that's not reliable for clinical interpretation." She's like, "No, it says my oxygen is this," and I was checking her oxygen and looking at the patient and said, "No, that's definitely not what your oxygen level is." So they're not up to the standards for clinical reliability for sure. Yes.
Take on supplements for runners.
Well, tell me what you mean by supplements.
Nowadays, there's a hype that to intensity workers, they took 1 scoop of 6 scoop of protein. So many people.
Whey protein. Okay, and for me, I think it's almost just a personal thing. I consider eating a hobby. I like food. So if I need something in terms of nutrients, I want to get it from food. I don't like things that come in a package, if possible. And to me, supplements, they're not necessarily natural foods. To be honest, when we say what's natural, running a marathon is also not very natural. So I think if it's the easiest way, the most appropriate way for you to get what your body needs, then it's probably good to utilize. I do think you have to be careful, because a lot of the production of supplements is not regulated well. So who knows what's really in that canister? Particularly, for the competitive athletes, and because of concerns with anti-doping. What I tell my clients honestly is, if you're going to use a supplemental product, make sure that the company that's providing it is big enough so that if you fail a drug test, they have enough money for you to sue them. Make sure that it's a big company, not a small company, because you want them to have deep pockets. But that's kind of a joke, but at the same time, I think it's a legitimate concern, because there are athletes at the top level who failed doping tests because there was something in the supplement which was not listed on the ingredients list. And I just like food. So, why would I want to get potassium in a packet when I can eat bananas? So, yeah.
What should be the ideal resting time between two workouts?
The ideal resting time between two workouts. It completely depends on the person, the intensity. One of the other variables that we talked about, which is life. For someone who's a professional athlete, who it's their job to wake up in the morning, go run, go take a nap, go run again, and then they can say, okay, tomorrow I need to take it easy, I didn't work out today. They need one type of recovery. For somebody who has a job and who did a workout today and then went to work and got a project that kept them late at night, and they didn't sleep well and they get up early the next morning, they need a different type of recovery. So that's a really terrible answer, but it's highly variable. I would say almost never should it be less than 2 days. Every once in a while, I actually do put them on back-to-back days, but essentially in my mind, that's like one mega workout. and so then I'm going to put a big recovery afterwards. My wife in her training at the moment, she's working full time. She's also in clinical healthcare with myself, and so during the week she doesn't have a lot of time to do big workouts. So she typically does a big workout, and when I say a big workout, something between 20 and 25 kilometers with a huge chunk of quality on Saturday, followed by a run of maybe even 40K on Sunday. But then she doesn't do anything really of quality until Thursday or maybe Wednesday, and even that's very small. So she's basically giving herself 5 days between a really, really big workout, which takes 2 days to complete, and then recovery. So you have to make it fit the lifestyle of the individual in question. So I'd say almost never less than 2 days, unless you're doing something kind of crazy like that. Probably 3 days if the workout, especially once you're into like marathon training. Marathon workouts are different. If you're training for a 5K, or maybe you can go with 2 days. If you're training for a marathon, probably 3 days minimum. And make sure that just make the workouts good. You know, if you're not feeling like I need recovery, then you didn't do the workout right. You know, the workout should stimulate fatigue, because fatigue is a response that the body needs to have in order to build up. And so if you're not getting broken down, then you're not building up. And so if you feel like I did a workout yesterday, but I want to run fast today, you probably didn't really do the workout.
Thank you so much, Jay.